I'm Mackenzie, but everyone calls me Mac, and at 34, I never imagined my financial success would become the weapon that both united and divided my family. When my little sister Olivia got engaged, I happily offered to fund her $45,000 dream wedding. Our bond had always been unbreakable until the Prescotts, her future in-laws, decided I wasn't worthy of attending the celebration I was financing. What they didn't expect was my quiet determination as I methodically canceled every single vendor. Their perfect society wedding crumbled when 200 guests arrived at an empty, locked venue. Before I share how everything unraveled, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and stay for the moment these entitled in-laws realized they'd messed with the wrong sister. Our story begins in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Framingham, a middle-class suburb about 20 miles west of Boston. Mom worked as a nurse at Metro West Medical Center, taking double shifts whenever possible, while juggling part-time bookkeeping jobs on weekends. Dad struggled with his small carpentry business, the tension in their marriage thickening with each unpaid bill until he finally walked out when I was 12 and Olivia was just 7. That morning remains etched in my memory, Olivia's small fingers gripping my pajama sleeve, her wide hazel eyes brimming with confusion as the front door slammed for the final time. "Where's Daddy going, Mackie?" she'd whispered, and something shifted inside me, a fierce protectiveness that would define our relationship for decades to come. I promised myself that my little sister would never feel abandoned again. Throughout middle school, I became Olivia's surrogate parent when Mom was drowning in work, packing her lunches with little heart-shaped notes, braiding her auburn hair before school, attending her parent-teacher conferences, and cheering the loudest at her dance recitals. By high school, I was juggling honors classes with part-time jobs at the local grocery store and babysitting gigs, squirreling away every dollar I could. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Lattimore, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and brutal honesty, pushed me to apply for scholarships, staying after hours to review my essays until they gleamed with potential. The acceptance letter from Boston University's finance program, accompanied by a substantial merit scholarship, felt like winning the lottery. College tested my resolve, balancing a full course load with 25 hours weekly at the campus coffee shop and an unpaid internship at a financial services firm downtown. My tiny dorm room became Olivia's weekend refuge during her rocky high school years, a place where she could escape the emptiness of our family home and experiment with art. Unlike my practical nature, Olivia overflowed with creativity. Her watercolors captured emotions rather than images, swirls of color that somehow made viewers feel homesick for places they'd never been. After graduation, I secured an entry-level position at Atlantic Advisors, a boutique financial planning firm where I steadily climbed from analyst to associate to senior advisor over the next decade. Meanwhile, Olivia pursued a fine arts degree at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, her talent undeniable, but her career prospects uncertain. She bounced between gallery assistant positions, graphic design freelancing, and barista jobs, her artistic brilliance perpetually undervalued in a world that measured success in dollar signs and stability. Despite our diverging paths, we maintained our connection through sacred weekly brunches at the Friendly Toast in Back Bay, where we'd split enormous plates of banana bread French toast and trade stories over endless cups of coffee. Every December, we'd spend a Saturday at Prudential Center Mall, picking out one special Christmas gift for each other, a tradition that dated back to our childhood when we'd pooled our meager allowances to buy each other treasures from the dollar store. Olivia met James Prescott at a gallery opening where one of her mixed media pieces had been selected for display. She called me at midnight, her voice breathless with excitement, describing a tall, sandy-haired man in a perfectly tailored navy suit who had stood transfixed before her artwork for 20 minutes before approaching her with insightful questions about her technique. James came from old Boston money. His family owned a prestigious investment firm that had been operating since the 1920s, their name adorning buildings at Harvard and their photos occasionally appearing in Boston Magazine's society pages. Their courtship unfolded like a montage from a romantic film, James surprising Olivia with tickets to a glass-blowing workshop in Vermont, weekend trips to his family's Cape Cod estate, and backstage passes to the Boston Symphony Orchestra, where his uncle served on the board. My first impression of James, when Olivia finally introduced us at an upscale restaurant in Beacon Hill, was cautiously positive. He exhibited impeccable manners and seemed genuinely interested in Olivia's artistic aspirations, though I caught flickers of surprise crossing his face when she mentioned our humble upbringing. His handshake was firm but somehow distant, his smile not quite reaching his eyes when he learned about my career in financial advising. A respectable field, he'd commented with the faintest hint of condescension. Meeting his parents, Eleanor and Richard Prescott, at their annual Christmas gathering reinforced my instinctive wariness. They greeted me with rehearsed pleasantness that barely masked their assessment of my off-the-rack cocktail dress and department store heels. Eleanor, with her perfectly coiffed silver bob and triple strand of pearls, kept steering conversations toward lineage and education, subjects that inevitably highlighted the gap between our backgrounds. Still, I focused on how James made Olivia glow with happiness, how her previous insecurities seemed to melt away in his presence. After just 8 months of dating, James proposed during a private dinner at the Boston Harbor Hotel with a 3-carat emerald-cut diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. When Olivia called with the news, sobbing with joy, my first instinct was to offer the ultimate gift. "I'll pay for the wedding," I told her, the words tumbling out before I could consider the magnitude of my promise. "You've always dreamed of a beautiful celebration, and I've been saving for something special." What I didn't mention was that those savings had been earmarked for a down payment on a condo, a goal I'd been inching toward for 5 years. The squeal of delight that echoed through my phone convinced me the sacrifice was worthwhile. After all, what could possibly go wrong? The initial wedding plans Olivia sketched out were tasteful yet modest. An afternoon ceremony at the Boston Public Garden followed by a reception for 80 guests at a charming restaurant in South End. She envisioned wildflower bouquets, string lights crisscrossing above dinner tables, and a small jazz trio playing standards during cocktail hour. Nothing extravagant, she assured me as we pored over Pinterest boards in my apartment, laptop balanced on her knees as she sipped chamomile tea. Just something intimate and meaningful. I'd mentally calculated a budget of $20,000, substantial but manageable with my recent promotion and bonus. The first caution flag fluttered 2 weeks later when the Prescotts insisted on hosting the newly engaged couple and me for dinner at their Beacon Hill brownstone to discuss wedding preliminaries. Their home resembled a museum, with original oil paintings illuminated by custom lighting, antique furniture that looked more decorative than functional, and a dining room table that could comfortably seat 16. Eleanor Prescott presided at the head, her posture impeccable as a uniformed server poured wine into crystal stemware worth more than my monthly rent. "Olivia shared your quaint garden wedding concept," Eleanor began, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "But darling, you're joining the Prescott family now. Richard and I have certain obligations to uphold." Richard nodded solemnly from the opposite end of the table, his signet ring catching the light as he unfolded a leather portfolio. "We've taken the liberty of drafting an appropriate guest list," he announced, sliding a spreadsheet across the polished mahogany. "Our business associates, club members, and, of course, family connections must be included." I watched the color drain from my sister's face as she scanned the document. 230 people, she whispered, her voice smaller than I'd heard since childhood. James squeezed her hand reassuringly, his expression simultaneously apologetic and insistent. "My parents have maintained these relationships for decades, Liv. They're important connections for our future." That evening, the Boston Public Garden vanished from consideration, deemed insufficiently secure for guests of certain prominence. The intimate restaurant reception transformed into a ballroom affair at the Four Seasons overlooking Boston Harbor, with discussions of champagne towers, raw bars, and a 10-piece orchestra. I observed my sister's dreams being methodically dismantled and replaced with the Prescott's vision, while the mental calculator in my head spun wildly upward. Later that week, Olivia called me in tears from her apartment. Eleanor said my dress choices were pedestrian and made an appointment at Val's Bridal. Mac. The gowns there start at $7,000. I swallowed hard, staring at my budget spreadsheet. If that's what you want, we'll make it work, I assured her, immediately transferring another $5,000 from my emergency fund into the wedding account. Just be true to yourself, Liv. This is your day. But whose day was it truly becoming? Each week brought new, essential additions, letterpress invitations on imported paper, hand-calligraphed escort cards, exotic flower arrangements taller than Olivia herself. The guest list expanded to include a state senator, 2 university deans, and a minor European aristocrat who had once summered with the Prescotts in the south of France. I noticed subtle shifts in my sister as well. Her artist's wardrobe of colorful scarves and vintage finds gradually replaced by subdued designer pieces that Eleanor deemed appropriate. Her infectious laugh became more restrained, her opinions increasingly deferential to James and his parents. Without consultation, the Prescotts hired Vivian Montgomery, Boston's most exclusive wedding planner, whose clients included professional athletes and tech billionaires. The Montgomerys have known our family for generations, Eleanor explained during a planning meeting, the subtle emphasis on family, making it clear that Olivia and I existed outside that hallowed circle. Despite footing the entire bill, I found myself increasingly sidelined in decisions. Vivian would address all questions to Eleanor, then reluctantly turn to me only when payment details needed confirmation. During a cake tasting at an upscale patisserie, Richard questioned my choice of the lemon elderflower option. Perhaps Mackenzie's palate isn't accustomed to sophisticated flavor profiles, he remarked to the pastry chef, as if I weren't sitting directly across from him. We'll go with the champagne truffle. Each planning meeting became an exercise in subtle humiliation. Eleanor would glance disapprovingly at my practical pumps while complimenting Olivia on her new Louboutins, a gift from James, purchased with money from his trust fund. Richard would interject whenever I spoke about financial considerations, suggesting that focusing too much on costs cheapens the experience. Even James, who initially had shown me basic courtesy, began mimicking his parents' dismissive tone. Mackenzie doesn't understand how these events function in our circle, he told the florist when I questioned the necessity of importing peonies out of season. All the while, I kept signing checks and increasing my credit card limits, watching my financial security evaporate in service of an event where I felt increasingly unwelcome. 6 months before the wedding, the budget had ballooned to $35,000, with no ceiling in sight. Are you sure about all this? I asked Olivia during a rare moment alone after a bridesmaid's fitting. My sister, once my closest confidant, looked at me with unfamiliar detachment. The Prescotts know what's best, Mac. I don't want to embarrass James. In that moment, I glimpsed how completely she had surrendered to their world, and the chasm widening between us felt bottomless. 6 months before the wedding date, the transformation in both the celebration scale and my sister's personality had become impossible to ignore. My monthly budget for the wedding had tripled, forcing me to dip into my retirement accounts, a financial cardinal sin I'd never recommend to clients. Meanwhile, Olivia had missed our last 3 Sunday brunches, texting last-minute cancellations with excuses about urgent wedding matters or brunches with Eleanor's garden club associates. When we did connect by phone, her voice carried an unfamiliar clipped accent that mimicked Eleanor's Boston Brahmin drawl. One Tuesday evening, I received an unexpected call from my credit card company flagging unusual spending activity, $12,000 in new charges from vendors I hadn't approved. The floral budget had somehow expanded to include imported cherry blossoms for every table. The photography package now included a pre-wedding documentary shoot at the Prescotts' summer home. A vintage Rolls-Royce had been secured for the bridal party transportation when we'd previously agreed on a simple limousine service. Furious and bewildered, I called Vivian Montgomery directly, catching her between appointments. I didn't authorize these expenses, I stated firmly, pacing my apartment's small kitchen. This is financial misconduct. Her response chilled me. I received explicit approval from Eleanor Prescott, who assured me you had discussed these upgrades. She mentioned you preferred to remain hands-off regarding the aesthetic decisions. The revelation that the Prescotts were making unilateral financial commitments in my name left me breathless with anger. I immediately drove to Olivia's apartment, determined to have a face-to-face conversation about boundaries and respect. I found her surrounded by wedding magazines, fabric swatches spread across her living room floor like fallen autumn leaves. "Liv, we need to talk about your future in-laws overstepping," I began, settling beside her on the carpet. My sister's expression hardened in a way I'd never witnessed before. "They're not overstepping, they're helping," she countered, gathering the fabric samples defensively. "Eleanor says my original choices were embarrassingly provincial. She's protecting me from making mistakes I'd regret forever." The conversation quickly deteriorated, with Olivia accusing me of jealousy. "You've never understood what it means to move in elevated circles, Mac," and dismissing my financial concerns as tediously middle class. When I reminded her that my tediously middle class bank account was funding her fairy tale, she delivered the cutting response that would echo in my mind for weeks afterward. "James says if you truly loved me, you wouldn't attach strings to your gift." I left her apartment that evening with the unsettling realization that the Prescotts had succeeded in reframing my generosity as an obligation. The following weekend, I attended a menu tasting at the Four Seasons where I overheard James and his father in conversation near the restrooms, unaware of my presence around the corner. "Mackenzie continues to be problematic," James sighed. "Her constant questions about costs show such poor breeding." Richard's response was dismissive. "New money often betrays itself through excessive concern with prices. My mother always said true quality announces itself quietly, while insecurity shouts." Their laughter felt like ice water down my spine. At the cake tasting the following Thursday, I arrived early and took a seat in the bakery's elegant consultation room. Through the partially open door, I heard Eleanor's distinctive voice addressing the pastry chef. "We're expecting Olivia's sister shortly. She's the financial backer, poor thing, successful in that limited way self-made people can be, but woefully out of her depth with events of this caliber." The chef murmured something sympathetic as I sank lower in my chair, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Even the vendors were being conditioned to view me as an ATM with no taste or social standing. As the wedding date approached, my apartment became the unofficial storage facility for Olivia's various purchases: custom welcome baskets for out-of-town guests, monogrammed cocktail napkins, and hand-painted place cards all stacked in my spare bedroom. During one delivery drop-off, Olivia casually mentioned that Eleanor had requested access to the wedding fund account, just to streamline the process. When I expressed shock at this suggestion, my sister looked genuinely confused by my resistance. "It would be so much easier, Mac. Eleanor has connections with all these vendors, and they respect her. Sometimes your involvement actually complicates things." That evening, I checked the online access records for the dedicated wedding account I'd established and discovered multiple login attempts from an unrecognized IP address. The following morning, the bank's fraud department confirmed someone had attempted to add Eleanor Prescott as an authorized user on the account, a request they'd flagged as suspicious since it hadn't come directly from me. The realization that the Prescotts were not only manipulating my sister, but actively attempting to circumvent my financial authority ignited a fury I rarely allowed myself to experience. Yet even then, I swallowed my pride and anger for Olivia's sake. My sister's happiness had always been my priority, a commitment forged in the crucible of our father's abandonment. If tolerating the Prescotts' thinly veiled contempt was the price of Olivia's dream wedding, I would endure it, or so I thought, until an afternoon at the Prescott residence shattered that resolve completely. 3 weeks before the wedding date, Vivian Montgomery scheduled what she called a critical vendor coordination meeting at the Prescotts' home. The email specified a 4 o'clock start time, but I deliberately arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to review the latest budget adjustments privately with Vivian before everyone else arrived. The Prescotts' housekeeper, a stone-faced woman named Agnes, led me to the solarium at the back of the house and informed me that the family was concluding another matter in the adjacent drawing room. She left me with a cup of tea so weak it resembled slightly tinted water, served in a delicate porcelain cup that felt dangerously fragile in my hands. As I sat stiffly on an antique settee that prioritized appearance over comfort, voices drifted through the partially open pocket doors separating the rooms. Eleanor's distinctive cultured tone carried clearly. The situation with Olivia's sister has become untenable. Her presence at certain wedding events would be, frankly, embarrassing. A moment of silence followed before Richard's deeper voice responded. Absolutely. Did you see what she wore to the floral appointment? That polyester blazer with department store shoes? And the way she kept mentioning she was paying, as if we should be grateful. No class whatsoever. My heart began pounding so loudly, I feared they might hear it through the wall. I set down the teacup with trembling hands, torn between making my presence known and learning just how deeply this contempt ran. James, darling, you must agree, Eleanor continued. Your wedding photographs will be displayed in our home forever. Having Mackenzie's questionable styling in the family portraits would significantly lower their aesthetic value. James's voice, to my shock, held no defense of my sister's only living immediate family member. I understand your concerns, Mother. Olivia has mentioned that Mackenzie's outspokenness makes her anxious anyway. Perhaps there's a diplomatic solution that keeps everyone comfortable. The betrayal of hearing the man my sister loved casually discussing my exclusion from their wedding felt like a physical blow. But nothing prepared me for what came next. Olivia's voice, softer than the others but unmistakable, cut through my numbness like a serrated knife. Maybe Mac could just attend the ceremony? She could skip the reception entirely, and we wouldn't have to worry about her uncomfortable interactions with the Kensington Smythes or the Whitmores. A beat of silence followed before Eleanor responded with undisguised triumph. What an elegant solution, darling. The ceremony is barely 30 minutes, and she could be gone before any real socializing begins. She still gets to witness your vows, fulfilling the familial obligation without compromising the reception's sophistication. Richard chuckled, the sound oily with satisfaction. And she still pays for everything, of course. The perfect arrangement. I sat frozen, the teacup forgotten, as Eleanor's voice continued. I'll draft an email explaining the new arrangement. We'll emphasize how this allows her to avoid the exhausting social demands of the reception. She'll probably be relieved, poor thing. The sound of fingers tapping on a keyboard punctuated her words. James added thoughtfully, frame it as doing her a favor. She's clearly uncomfortable in our social settings anyway. At that moment, Vivian Montgomery's voice announced her arrival from what must have been the home's front entrance. I heard movement in the adjacent room, chairs scraping, footsteps approaching. Without conscious decision, I found myself standing, my body moving on autopilot as the pocket doors slid fully open. 5 startled faces turned toward me. Eleanor and Richard, James, Olivia, and Vivian, who had just joined them. The stunned silence confirmed they hadn't realized I could hear their entire conversation. Eleanor recovered first, her society smile snapping into place like a mask. Mackenzie, you're early. We were just discussing some final adjustments to the seating chart. My voice emerged with a calm I didn't feel. No. You were discussing how to uninvite me for my sister's wedding reception while keeping my money. I heard everything. Color drained from Olivia's face, her freckles standing out starkly against suddenly pale skin. James stepped forward, his handsome features arranged in an expression of practiced concern. Mackenzie, this is an emotional misunderstanding. We're simply trying to ensure everyone's comfort level. I cut him off. Everyone except mine, apparently. Is this true, Olivia? You want me only at the ceremony? My sister couldn't meet my eyes, her gaze fixed on the Italian marble floor. Her silence answered more eloquently than words ever could. Richard cleared his throat, his businessman persona taking over. Now, Mackenzie, let's not be dramatic. This is essentially a business arrangement, nothing personal. You provided financial backing, and you'll still witness the official marriage. The social component is separate. Eleanor's laptop screen remained open to a half-written email with my name in the address field, the subject line reading, adjusted wedding day schedule, a thoughtful solution. The evidence of their premeditated exclusion, prepared while smiling to my face, crystallized something inside me. A business arrangement. I repeated slowly. Is that how you all view this? Because in business, services aren't rendered until payment is confirmed. Vivian shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the professional implications. Perhaps we should reschedule today's meeting until— No need, I interrupted, gathering my purse and the wedding binder I'd meticulously maintained for months. I understand exactly where things stand now. I turned to my sister one last time, giving her a final chance to speak, to object, to show some glimmer of the Olivia I'd known. She merely twisted her enormous engagement ring, eyes still downcast. Olivia, I said softly, I've supported you my entire life. I would have given you anything. All I wanted was to stand beside you on your wedding day, as your sister and your friend. As I walked toward the door, Eleanor called after me. Don't make rash decisions, Mackenzie. The deposits are non-refundable anyway. I paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. You know what else is non-refundable, Eleanor? Family loyalty. But apparently, the Prescotts purchased that too. The drive home passed in a blur of tears. At a red light, I caught sight of my rearview mirror, where I'd tucked photos of Olivia and me throughout the years, at her college graduation, laughing on a boat trip to Martha's Vineyard, making snow angels in our childhood backyard. In a single fluid motion, I ripped them all down, the fragments fluttering to the passenger seat like confetti from a celebration that would never happen. The week following the confrontation at the Prescotts' home passed in a haze of alternating numbness and gut-wrenching pain. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, unable to focus on client portfolios while my personal finances and heart lay in shambles. Sleep eluded me, meals became optional, and my normally tidy apartment deteriorated into a landscape of discarded tissues and half-empty tea mugs. My phone buzzed periodically with texts from Olivia. Not apologies, but practical questions about vendor contact information and payment schedules, as if our relationship had been reduced to a business transaction exactly as Richard had suggested. Each message twisted the knife deeper, confirming that the Prescotts' influence had completely eclipsed our sisterhood. On the third day of my self-imposed isolation, my best friend Taylor arrived unannounced, armed with grocery bags and determined expression. You look like hell warmed over, she announced, pushing past me into the apartment. Taylor had been my roommate in college, a psychology major, who now worked as a family therapist, and she wasn't one to mince words. She force-fed me actual nutrition, opened windows to dispel the stale air, and listened without interruption as I poured out the entire humiliating story. When I finished, she placed both hands firmly on my shoulders. Mac, what they did was emotional and financial abuse. They isolated Olivia, manipulated her allegiances, and attempted to exploit your generosity while denying you basic dignity. In my professional practice, I'd call this a textbook case of narcissistic family dynamics. Her clear-eyed assessment penetrated the fog of hurt clouding my judgment. So what do I do now? I whispered, feeling more lost than I had since childhood. Taylor's expression softened. First, you establish boundaries that protect your well-being. Then you decide whether your financial commitment still aligns with your values. You're not obligated to fund people who devalue and discard you. After Taylor left, I spent hours staring at the ceiling, wrestling with impossible choices. My entire adult life had been defined by protecting and supporting Olivia. Could I really withdraw that support now, even amid such betrayal? Would canceling the financial arrangements make me vindictive, proving the Prescotts right about my poor breeding? Or would continuing to pay for a celebration I wasn't welcome to attend set a precedent of accepting mistreatment? The following morning, I called Dr. Winters, a therapist I'd seen briefly after a difficult breakup years earlier. She squeezed me in for an emergency session that afternoon. What would you tell a client in your situation? She asked after hearing my story. Someone whose family member allowed others to erase them while expecting continued financial support. The question clarified everything. I would never advise anyone to remain financially entangled with people who showed such profound disrespect. The clarity that washed over me felt like emerging from a dark tunnel into sunlight. That evening, I spread all the wedding documentation across my dining table, contracts, invoices, payment receipts, vendor contact information. With methodical precision born from years of financial training, I created a comprehensive spreadsheet listing every commitment, payment status, and cancellation policy. To my surprise, most vendors had clauses permitting cancellation with partial refunds up to 2 weeks before the event, especially if done directly by the contracting party, which was me, not the Prescotts. A quick call to my credit card company confirmed I could dispute any unauthorized charges added without my consent, and that vendor services contracted under potentially fraudulent circumstances, like the Prescotts impersonating me, could potentially be reversed entirely. Armed with this information and newfound resolve, I developed a systematic action plan. Over the next 4 days, I contacted all 17 vendors, explaining the situation with calm professionalism. I'm Mackenzie Miller, the contracting party for the Prescott-Miller wedding. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I need to cancel these services and initiate the cancellation process outlined in our agreement. Most vendors responded with unexpected sympathy. Apparently, the Prescotts' condescending treatment extended to service providers as well. The catering manager confided that Eleanor had reduced his assistant to tears over the placement of water goblets. The florist admitted relief at not having to source out-of-season peonies from 3 different continents. Even Vivian Montgomery, after initial resistance, became cooperative when I forwarded her the email chain documenting the Prescotts' attempt to exclude me while maintaining my financial responsibility. I value my professional reputation, she stated coolly. I cannot be associated with clients who operate in this manner. The cancellation process was emotionally exhausting but financially vindicating. Through careful negotiation and by leveraging the cancellation terms in the original contracts, I managed to recover nearly 60% of the money I'd paid, far more than I'd initially hoped. Each reclaimed dollar felt like reclaiming a small piece of my self-respect. Throughout this process, my phone remained suspiciously silent from the Prescott camp. Either they remained unaware of my actions, or they were strategizing their response. Only once did I reach out to Olivia, leaving a detailed voicemail explaining my decision. I love you, Liv, but I cannot and will not finance an event where I'm deemed unworthy of full participation. The contracts have been canceled. I hope someday you'll understand this isn't about the money. It's about basic respect and recognizing what family truly means. She never returned the call. The weight that had pressed against my chest since that afternoon in the Prescott's solarium gradually lifted with each vendor confirmation. The final cancellation, the Four Seasons venue itself, brought an unexpected sense of peace. The events coordinator, a woman named Daniela with kind eyes and a gentle manner, handled the situation with remarkable grace. We've worked with the Prescotts before, she said significantly, requiring no further explanation. Your sister is welcome to rebook directly if she wishes, but all current arrangements have been terminated as requested. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The burden of financial obligation and emotional manipulation finally lifted from my shoulders. I had stood up for myself in the most concrete way possible, by refusing to bankroll my own exclusion. Whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that I had maintained my dignity and self-respect. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, just 9 days away. The Prescotts would discover the consequences of their actions soon enough. The morning of what should have been Olivia's wedding day dawned with cruel perfection. Clear blue skies, gentle breeze, ideal temperature for an early summer celebration. I awoke at my usual time, an automatic response from months of wedding-focused routine, before remembering that today would be anything but routine. A complex mixture of emotions churned inside me, lingering grief over losing my sister to the Prescotts' influence, anxiety about the impending fallout, and yes, a small but undeniable spark of vindication. I had taken my power back from people who sought to diminish me while exploiting my generosity. My phone remained silent throughout my morning coffee ritual, surprising given the cancellations should have been discovered by now. Perhaps the Prescotts had somehow salvaged the situation, redirecting their considerable wealth toward reinstating the vendors. This possibility left me simultaneously relieved and disappointed, emotions so contradictory I couldn't untangle them. Around 10 o'clock, as I was folding laundry in a futile attempt at normalcy, my cell phone finally lit up with an unfamiliar number. The caller identified himself as Marco, the wedding photographer I'd hired months earlier. Ms. Miller, I'm at the Four Seasons for today's event, but there seems to be some confusion. The staff claims they have no booking for a Prescott Miller wedding. The ballroom is currently being set up for a corporate event tomorrow. I've tried reaching Ms. Montgomery and your sister, but no one is answering. A cold ripple of satisfaction, mixed with disbelief, washed over me. Marco, I canceled all wedding services last week. Didn't you receive my notification? His confused pause spoke volumes. I received an email claiming to be from you last month, transferring all contact authority to Eleanor Prescott. She's been handling everything since then. She confirmed yesterday that today's timeline remained unchanged. The realization that Eleanor had been impersonating me to vendors explained the lack of reaction to my cancellations. She'd established herself as the primary contact, and some vendors had likely dismissed my communications as mistaken or fraudulent. I thanked Marco for calling and advised him to contact Eleanor directly, knowing full well the chaos beginning to unfold. Within the hour, my phone exploded with activity. A former colleague who had been invited to the wedding posted on Instagram, "Anyone else confused about the Prescott Miller wedding? Venue says no event today. #wedding fail, #confuse." Another guest tweeted a photo of confused people in formal wear standing outside the Four Seasons locked ballroom entrance. Taylor, who hadn't been invited but was following social media closely, forwarded screenshots of the unfolding confusion with the caption, "The Karma train has arrived at the station." At noon, my phone rang with Olivia's number. After a week of silence, she was suddenly desperate to reach me. I let it go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation. Her message was frantic, tearful. "Mac, everything's falling apart. The venue claims we don't have a reservation. The florist never delivered. The caterer isn't responding. Please call me back, I don't understand what's happening." Minutes later, James called, his message considerably less polite, threatening legal action for sabotage and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Richard's voicemail contained explicit threats about making sure I never worked in Boston again. Eleanor didn't bother with voicemail, instead sending a text that simply read, "You vindictive little climber. You've made an enemy for life." I silenced my phone and tried to process the surreal situation. Casey, Olivia's maid of honor and closest friend since art school, called from a number I didn't recognize after apparently being blocked on Olivia's phone. "Mac, it's absolute chaos here," she reported, her voice a mixture of horror and reluctant admiration. 200 people in formal wear are standing around the hotel lobby. Eleanor is having a complete meltdown, screaming at the venue manager that she's friends with the hotel owner. Richard tried using his American Express Black card to book the space on the spot, but there's literally another event being set up. James is threatening to sue everyone in sight. She paused before adding, "Olivia is just sitting in a corner crying in her wedding dress. She keeps saying your name." That detail pierced through my satisfaction, reminding me that despite everything, my sister was suffering. Casey continued her live reporting. The cake never arrived. The string quartet showed up but left when no one could pay their remaining balance. The Prescotts apparently didn't bring checkbooks or enough cash, assuming everything was prepaid, which it obviously wasn't. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Eleanor is telling everyone there was a venue mix-up, but half the guests have figured out what really happened. Your name is being mentioned a lot." Opinions seem divided between cold-blooded revenge and justified response to being uninvited from a wedding you paid for. As the afternoon progressed, the disaster acquired a life of its own. Someone had tipped off a local news crew covering summer wedding trends, who arrived to capture footage of bewildered guests and Eleanor's public confrontation with the hotel management. Clips of Richard Prescott attempting to write a check for $50,000 to secure an immediate alternate venue, only to be politely informed that such arrangements required weeks of planning, began circulating on social media. My phone continued buzzing with messages from mutual acquaintances, ranging from shocked, "Did you really cancel your sister's entire wedding?" to supportive, legend status achieved. By evening, what should have been a reception in full swing had devolved into scattered groups of guests at various restaurants across Boston, the bride and groom nowhere to be found, and the Prescotts facing a humiliation unprecedented in their privileged lives. Around 8 o'clock, a final text came from Olivia. "I hope you're satisfied. You've ruined everything." Those 7 words confirmed that, even now, she couldn't recognize her own role in what had transpired, or the Prescotts' manipulation that had driven us to this point. I didn't respond, but for the first time that day, I cried. Not for the wasted money or the public spectacle, but for the sister who still couldn't see how completely she'd been transformed by people who valued status over genuine connection. As night fell, I sat alone on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. The day's events had unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated, yet the hollow victory brought little joy. I had stood my ground and refused to be discarded while my checkbook remained useful. The consequences had been spectacular and public. But somewhere beneath the justified boundaries and reclaimed self-respect lay the undeniable truth that I had lost my sister, not today, but gradually over the preceding months as the Prescotts systematically replaced her values with their own. That was the real tragedy, far outweighing any cancelled celebration. 2 months of complete silence followed the wedding day disaster. No calls from Olivia. No legal threats from the Prescotts despite their initial bluster, just a peculiar vacuum where a relationship had once existed. I focused on rebuilding my financial security, working additional consulting hours, and gradually replenishing my depleted savings. Therapy sessions with Dr. Winters became a weekly anchor, helping me process the complex grief of losing my sister while she was still very much alive. Family estrangement involves ambiguous loss, she explained during one particularly difficult session. There's no funeral, no closure ritual, just an ongoing absence that others often don't understand or validate. This framework helped me navigate well-meaning colleagues who kept asking when Olivia and I would patch things up, as if we'd experienced a simple misunderstanding rather than a fundamental betrayal. 6 weeks after the non-wedding, I received an unexpected visit from Richard Prescott at my office. He bypassed security by claiming a financial consultation appointment, appearing beside my desk with the same imperious expression I remembered from planning meetings. "We need to discuss reparations for your actions," he began without preamble. I interrupted immediately, pressing the intercom button for security. "Mr. Prescott is leaving now," I stated clearly, maintaining eye contact as his face flushed with unaccustomed defiance. His parting words, "This isn't over, you manipulative gold digger," earned him a permanent ban from the building and, after consultation with my attorney, a restraining order when concerning messages began appearing in my professional inbox. Healing came in unexpected forms. I booked a solo trip to Portugal, a country I'd always wanted to explore but had postponed while funneling money into Olivia's wedding. Walking ancient cobblestone streets and sampling local wines, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been submerged beneath caregiving responsibilities. Taylor convinced me to join her weekend hiking group, where physical exertion and natural beauty provided perspective that office walls couldn't contain. My professional reputation actually improved following the wedding incident. Several female clients confided similar experiences with controlling in-laws, and my firm's partners commended my composure during Richard's ambush. Precisely 74 days after the wedding that wasn't, Olivia texted asking to meet. We arranged to convene at a neutral location, a coffee shop equidistant from our respective apartments, neither the beloved brunch spot of our past nor anywhere associated with wedding planning. She arrived looking simultaneously familiar and foreign, thinner than I remembered, her artistic wardrobe partially reasserted, but paired with the expensive highlights and manicure that Eleanor had insisted upon. We occupied a corner table, steam rising between us from mugs that remained largely untouched. "I got married," she began abruptly, 2 weeks after the canceled wedding. Courthouse ceremony, with just James's parents as witnesses. Eleanor organized a small dinner afterwards at their club. The matter-of-fact delivery of news that would once have been unthinkable between us illustrated how completely our connection had fractured. "Congratulations," I offered, unsure what response she expected. Silence stretched between us until she continued. "Things with the Prescotts aren't what I expected. Eleanor critiques everything. my housekeeping, my conversation skills, even how I arrange flowers in my own home. Richard makes constant comments about my artistic temperament, like it's a character flaw that needs correction. James, her voice faltered slightly. James sides with them every time. I resisted the urge to say, "I told you so," instead asking gently, "Why are you telling me this, Liv?" Her eyes, so similar to mine in shape and color, finally met my gaze directly. "I'm sorry, Mac. Not for marrying James, or even for wanting a beautiful wedding, but for letting them convince me that excluding you was acceptable. For believing their narrative that your concerns about money were bourgeois and embarrassing rather than responsible and generous. For forgetting that when everyone else left, you always stayed." The apology, while significant, couldn't instantly repair the trust shattered by months of escalating disrespect. We spoke for nearly 3 hours that afternoon, excavating painful truths and tentative possibilities. Olivia revealed the aftermath from her perspective, the Prescotts' fury and humiliation, their initial insistence that she cut ties with me permanently, and her slow-dawning recognition that their controlling behavior extended far beyond wedding decisions. We established cautious communication boundaries, occasional text messages, monthly coffee meetings, no discussion of financial matters until trust could be rebuilt. No invitations to Prescott family events, which suited me perfectly. Over the following year, our relationship developed into something new, neither the inseparable bond of our childhood nor the strained connection of the wedding period, but something more mature that acknowledged both our shared history and our different paths. Olivia began setting boundaries with her in-laws, a process both painful and empowering. James, to my surprise, eventually supported these boundaries after witnessing his parents' treatment of his wife, without the buffer of wedding excitement. They moved to Providence for his work, creating geographical distance that helped Olivia rediscover her artistic voice and establish an identity separate from Prescott family expectations. My own life expanded in unexpected directions. I reconnected with Michael, a former client who had left the firm years earlier, at a finance industry conference. Our professional respect evolved into friendship and eventually romance built on mutual admiration and shared values. Unlike the Prescotts, Michael valued my drive and financial acumen, never treating my success as incompatible with femininity or social grace. When he first heard the wedding cancellation story months into our relationship, his response was unequivocal. "You didn't just dodge a bullet, you dodged a nuclear warhead. And you protected your sister from people who would have happily extracted value from you both indefinitely." The wedding account, closed after all refunds and cancellations processed, yielded enough recovered funds for a modest down payment on a condo overlooking the Charles River, not the spacious place I'd originally planned, but a symbol of reclaimed independence that felt perfect nevertheless. Shortly after moving in, I hosted a housewarming gathering for my chosen family, Taylor and her husband, colleagues who had supported me through the aftermath, and yes, Olivia, who came alone and brought a watercolor she'd painted of our childhood home. The most profound lesson from the entire experience wasn't about weddings or money or even family loyalty, but about the quiet power of recognizing your own worth when others fail to see it. True love, whether familial, romantic, or friendly, never requires self-erasure. It doesn't demand financial sacrifice without basic respect. It doesn't celebrate your generosity while excluding you from the celebration. Each time I stand firm in my boundaries now, I honor the difficult wisdom earned through that wedding that never was. Healing isn't linear, and some days the hurt resurfaces unexpectedly. Olivia and I may never fully recapture the uncomplicated closeness we once shared, but we're building something more honest in its place. The greatest wedding gift I gave wasn't the money I spent or even the lesson I taught by canceling, but the example of valuing myself enough to walk away from people who didn't. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have canceled everything, tried to attend just the ceremony as suggested, or found another solution entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button for more authentic stories about setting boundaries and honoring your self-worth. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't writing another check. It's walking away with your dignity intact. Thank you for listening, and may you always recognize your value, even when those closest to you temporarily forget.